They locked a poor girl in the dungeon for touching the royal sword, but the vampire king freed her himself. The girl's scream shattered the throne room silence as guards dragged her away, her fingers still bleeding from where the ancient blade had burned her flesh. But what terrified the court wasn't her cry. It was the way the royal sword had begun to glow the moment her skin touched its hilt, pulsing with a light unseen for 3 centuries. And the vampire king rose from his throne with eyes wide, not in anger, but in something far more dangerous: recognition. Wait, before the next revelation happens, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. The guards threw her into the cell with such force that Alara's head cracked against the stone wall. Pain exploded behind her eyes, but she bit down on her tongue to keep from crying out again. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Blood, her blood, dripped from her burned palm onto the filthy straw beneath her, each drop hissing faintly as it touched the ground, releasing tiny wisps of silver smoke. That wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. Above her, in the castle that looms like a crown of thorns over the kingdom of Nocturna, she could hear the muffled chaos of the court, voices raised in alarm, the clash of steel, running footsteps. All because she, a servant girl from the kitchens, had committed the unthinkable crime of touching the royal sword of Valdris. She hadn't meant to. God above, she hadn't meant to. Alara pressed her good hand against the rough stone and pulled herself into a sitting position, her vision swimming. The dungeon was exactly as miserable as she'd imagined. Damp, reeking of mildew and despair, with chains bolted to the walls and dark stains on the floor that she didn't want to examine too closely. A single torch guttered in a bracket outside her cell, casting dancing shadows that looked almost alive. She examined her burned hand in the dim light. The flesh of her palm was angry and red, marked with strange symbols that seemed to have been seared into her skin. They weren't random burns. They were deliberate, precise, forming patterns she didn't recognize, but somehow felt she should. "What have I done?" she whispered to the darkness. The answer came not from her own thoughts, but from a voice as smooth as silk and as cold as winter frost. "You have awakened something that was meant to sleep forever." Alara's head snapped up. A figure stood outside her cell, though she hadn't heard any footsteps, hadn't heard the dungeon door open. He was tall and impossibly beautiful in the way of nightmares. Pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the torchlight, hair as black as a raven's wing falling to his shoulders, and eyes that burned with an inner red light. He wore black velvet and silver chains, and a crown of thorns rested on his brow, each point tipped with a ruby that looked disturbingly like drops of blood. The Vampire King, Alaric Valdris himself. Alara scrambled backward until her spine hit the wall, her heart thundering so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Of course he could hear it. Vampires heard everything. The pulse of blood through veins, the whisper of breath, the thunder of fear. "Your Majesty," she managed, dropping her eyes to the floor as she'd been taught. Servants never looked directly at nobility, and certainly never at the immortal king who had ruled Nocturna for over 500 years. "Look at me," he commanded, and the weight of centuries pressed down on those 3 words, making them impossible to disobey. She raised her eyes slowly, expecting to see rage, expecting to see hunger. Instead, she saw something far more unsettling: fascination. Alaric studied her with the intensity of a scholar examining a rare manuscript. His gaze traveled from her tangled brown hair to her simple servant's dress, torn and dirtied from her rough treatment, finally settling on her burned hand. "Show me," he said. Ilara hesitated, then extended her trembling hand through the bars. To her shock, the king reached out and took it, his fingers cool against her fevered skin. The touch should have been gentle, but she felt the barely restrained power in those hands, hands that could crush stone, that had ended thousands of lives over the centuries. He turned her palm toward the torchlight, his eyes narrowing as he studied the symbols burned into her flesh. "Impossible," he murmured, but his tone suggested he was seeing the very possible made manifest before his eyes. "I didn't mean to touch it," Ilara said quickly, the words tumbling out in her desperation to explain. "I was cleaning the throne room. I've only been assigned there for a week, and I tripped over my own feet carrying the water basin. I fell toward the display case, and I put out my hand to catch myself, and the glass shattered, and then I was touching the sword before I even realized what I'd done." Silence. The word was soft but absolute. Ilara's mouth snapped shut. Alaric released her hand and stepped back, beginning to pace before her cell like a caged predator. "Do you know why the royal sword is displayed in the throne room, girl? Do you know why it rests in a case of blessed glass, untouched for 3 centuries?" She shook her head mutely. "Because it is a weapon of prophecy," he said, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. "Forged in the age of unity, when vampires and humans lived not as predator and prey, but as allies against the true darkness." "It was wielded by the first Valdris king, my ancestor, alongside his human consort, a warrior woman with the blood of angels in her veins. Together they drove back the Shadow Court, the twisted vampires who fed on souls rather than blood, who would have consumed all life in their hunger." Ilara listened, mesmerized despite her fear. These were legends she'd heard whispered in the servants' quarters, but never with such certainty, such weight of truth. "When the war ended and peace was won, the sword was ensorcelled with a binding," Alaric continued. "It would only wake again when touched by one of pure angemic bloodline, a sign that the Shadow Court had returned and a new champion was needed." He stopped pacing and fixed her with those burning eyes. "The sword has been dark and dormant for 300 years. No one, not even I, can make it glow. Until tonight. Until you." The implications crashed over Ilara like a wave. "But I'm nobody," she protested. "I'm a servant girl from the outer villages. My mother was a seamstress, my father a farmer. We're as common as dirt." "Apparently not." Alaric's lips curved into something that might have been a smile on a less terrifying face. "Tell me your full name and lineage, every detail you know." "Ilara Ashenbride," she said, her mind racing. "My mother was Marin Ashenbride, daughter of Lysa Ashenbride. My father was Thomas Reed, son of William Reed. We've always been common folk, Your Majesty. Always poor, always working the land or serving in houses. There's nothing special about my family, nothing." "And yet, the sword knows differently." Alaric resumed his pacing, his movements fluid and hypnotic. "Angelic bloodlines can hide for generations, diluted and dormant, mistaken for simple good fortune or unusual health. A family that never quite succumbs to plague. Children who survive injuries that should kill them. A grandmother who lived to see her 100th year with clear eyes and steady hands." Ilara's breath caught. Her grandmother Lysa had lived to 97, still sharp as a knife to her last day, still able to thread a needle without spectacles. Her mother had survived the wasting fever that killed half the village when Alara was young, and Alara herself had fallen from a barn loft at age 7, a fall that should have broken her neck, but she'd walked away with only bruises. "I see you understand," Alaric said, watching her face. "The blood doesn't lie, and the sword doesn't wake for false pretenders, which presents me with a considerable problem." "A problem, Your Majesty? You touched the royal sword. That is a crime punishable by death, a law as old as Nocturna itself, designed to prevent thieves and the ambitious from attempting to claim what isn't theirs." He paused, and his next words fell like a blade. "My court demands your execution. They are baying for it even now, terrified that you might be exactly what the sword proclaims you to be." Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. "Then why are you here? Why aren't I already dead?" "Because I am 500 years old, and I have learned that prophecy ignored becomes prophecy fulfilled in the worst possible way." Alaric moved closer to the bars, close enough that she could see the individual threads of silver in his dark clothing, could smell the strange scent that clung to him, old parchment and winter roses, and something else, something ancient and not quite of this world. "The Shadow Court has been quiet for 3 centuries, but I have felt stirrings in the dark places of the world, whispers, movements, signs that the peace may be ending." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I believe the sword woke for a reason, that you, Ilara Ashenbride, are meant for something more than scrubbing floors and polishing silver. And I'm saying that I need to know for certain before I either protect you or kill you myself." The bluntness of his words stole her breath. How do you determine that?" "There is a test," Alaric said, "an ancient rite that will reveal the truth of your blood. If you are truly of angelic descent, you will survive it, and your powers will awaken. If you are not, if this was some fluke, some accident of magic, then you will die, quickly and without pain. I offer you this choice: face the test or face execution as a common criminal tomorrow at dawn. Either way, your life as a servant girl is over." Ilara stared at him, her mind reeling. A test that might kill her, or certain execution? Not much of a choice, but at least one path offered a sliver of hope. "If I survive this test," she said slowly, "what then? What happens to me?" "Then you become what the prophecy demands, a champion, a warrior, trained in combat and magic, prepared to face the Shadow Court when they rise again. And they will rise again, make no mistake." His eyes bore into hers. "You would be bound to that duty, bound to me and to Nocturna for as long as the threat remains. Your life would not be your own." "It's never been my own," Ilara said bitterly. "I've been a servant since I was old enough to carry a bucket. At least this way I'd be something more than invisible." Something flickered in Alaric's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or a grudging respect. "Very well. I'll return at moonset with what's needed for the rite. Prepare yourself, Ilara Ashenbride. By dawn, you'll either be dead or you'll be something the world hasn't seen in 300 years." He turned to leave, his cloak swirling dramatically in the torchlight. "Your Majesty," Ilara called out, and he paused without turning back. "Why are you doing this? Why not just let them execute me and be done with it?" There was a long silence, broken only by the distant drip of water somewhere in the depths of the dungeon. When Alaric finally spoke, his voice was so low she almost missed it. "Because the last time I ignored a prophecy, everyone I loved died screaming." I won't make that mistake twice. Then he was gone, moving with such speed that he seemed to simply vanish, leaving Ilara alone in her cell with her racing heart and her burned hand and the terrifying knowledge that her entire world had shattered in the space of a single touch. She looked down at the symbols on her palm again. In the dim light, they seemed to pulse faintly, as if echoing her heartbeat. Angelic blood, prophecy, the Shadow Court. A week ago, her biggest worry had been whether the head cook would notice she'd burned the breakfast porridge. Ilara laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed off the stone walls. Then she pressed her forehead against her knees and tried to think. If she died in this test, at least it would be over quickly. But if she survived, everything would change. She would no longer be invisible, no longer insignificant. She would matter. The thought was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Time passed with agonizing slowness. Ilara tried to rest but couldn't, her mind too full of questions and fears. Eventually, she heard footsteps approaching, measured, deliberate, accompanied by the soft clink of glass. Alaric materialized outside her cell once more, but he wasn't alone. Behind him came a woman who looked ancient beyond measure, her face a map of wrinkles, her hair pure white and hanging to her waist. She wore robes of deep purple and carried a wooden case that emitted a faint silver glow. "This is Severine," Alaric said, producing a key and unlocking the cell door. "She is the eldest of my blood court and the keeper of the old rituals. She will administer the test." The ancient vampire woman studied Ilara with eyes that had faded to a pale, milky blue. "A scrawny thing," she observed, in a voice like rustling paper. "But the sword doesn't lie. Open the case, Your Majesty." Alaric took the wooden case and opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a crystal vial filled with liquid that shimmered like captured starlight. Even from several feet away, Ilara could feel the power radiating from it, a warmth that made her chest ache with longing and fear in equal measure. "Angel's tears," Severine explained, "harvested before the Age of Unity ended, preserved through the centuries for this very purpose. If angelic blood runs in your veins, your body will recognize its kin and absorb the essence. You will be granted visions of your true lineage and your latent powers will awaken. If you are merely human, shall burn from the inside out," Alaric finished bluntly. "The agony will last approximately 30 seconds before death claims her." Ilara swallowed hard. 30 seconds doesn't sound so bad. 30 seconds of that particular agony will feel like 30 years, Severine said, not unkindly. "Are you certain, child? We can make your execution painless instead. A clean beheading, no suffering." "I'm certain." Ilara was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I want to know the truth. I need to know." Alaric held out the vial. "Then drink, Ilara Ashenbride, and let fate decide." She took the crystal container with trembling hands. The glass was warm to the touch, and the liquid inside seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. For a moment she hesitated, staring down at her potential death or salvation. Then she thought of her mother, dead of a fever that shouldn't have touched her if the angelic blood was strong. Of her grandmother, surviving when others fell. Of herself, always feeling like there was something more just beyond her reach, some purpose she couldn't quite grasp. Ilara pulled out the stopper and drank. The liquid was sweet and cold and burned like winter fire going down. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, pain. Pain exploded through every nerve in her body. Ilara would have screamed, but her throat locked shut, her muscles seizing. She was dimly aware of collapsing, of Alaric catching her before she hit the stone floor, but the physical world became secondary to the inferno consuming her from within. Images crashed through her mind in a cascade of light and sound. A woman with hair like spun gold, wearing armor that blazed with holy light, fighting alongside a dark-haired vampire king against creatures of living shadow. A child born in secret, hidden away in a common village, her wings bound and glamored to appear fully human. Generations passing, the blood diluting but never quite disappearing, carefully concealed by those who remembered what persecution the angelic-blooded had faced. Her grandmother's face, young and fierce, making a choice to hide rather than fight, to survive rather than die gloriously. And finally, herself, Ilara, standing in armor of silver and light, wielding the royal sword as it blazed with starfire, facing an enemy that had no face, only hunger, only endless darkness. The visions shattered like glass. Ilara gasped and found herself on the cold dungeon floor, cradled in Alaric's arms. The Vampire King was staring at her with an expression of wonder and something that might have been fear. "By the old gods," Severine breathed. "Look at her hand." Ilara raised her burned palm and nearly fainted again. The symbols were no longer angry red burns. They glowed with soft silver light. And as she watched, her flesh knitted together beneath them, healing at a visible pace. The pain that had racked her body was fading, replaced by a thrumming energy that made her feel like she could run for miles, could lift impossible weights, could face down armies. "It worked," she whispered. "More than worked," Alaric said, his voice rough. "I saw your visions. We all did. They bled out into the air around you. Your ancestor was Seraphina Lightbringer, the most powerful angelic warrior of the Age of Unity. She was the human consort I spoke of earlier." Her bloodline was thought lost when she fell in the final battle against the Shadow Court. "But it wasn't lost," Ilara said, understanding flooding through her. "She had a daughter she hid, who hid her own children in turn, and they hid theirs, until the truth became legend, and legend became forgotten." Severine moved closer, examining Ilara with new respect. "The blood has been sleeping, waiting for the time it would be needed again. And now? Now it's awake," Alaric finished. He helped Ilara to her feet, and she was surprised to find she wasn't weak or dizzy. If anything, she felt stronger than she ever had in her life. "Which means my problems have just multiplied exponentially." "Your problems?" Ilara echoed. "The court wants you dead," he reminded her. "Half of them out of fear, the other half out of political maneuvering. They've enjoyed 3 centuries of peace and prosperity with no threats to challenge my rule. The return of an angelic champion threatens that comfortable existence. So what do we do?" Alaric's eyes glittered with something dangerous. "We change the game entirely. Severine, summon the court to the throne room, all of them, no exceptions, and bring the royal sword." The ancient vampire bowed and glided away with surprising speed. Alaric turned back to Ilara, and she saw the calculating mind behind those immortal eyes, already planning moves and countermoves. "Listen carefully," he said. "What happens in the next hour will determine not just your fate, but potentially the fate of the entire kingdom. The court is divided into factions, some loyal to me personally, others loyal only to their own power. They've been waiting for any sign of weakness to exploit, and a prophesied champion appearing in my throne room might look like exactly that. I don't understand. Why would my existence weaken you? Because prophecies are dangerous things. They give people ideas about destiny and fate, about ordained outcomes that supersede the current order. If the court believes you're destined to be a great champion, they might also believe that I'm destined to fall, either beside you in battle or because of you." He gripped her shoulders, his touch firm but not painful. "You need to understand something, Elara. I am not a good man. I have ruled Nocturna with calculated ruthlessness for 500 years. I have made hard choices and terrible compromises. I have killed friends and spared enemies when it served my purposes. And I will continue to do whatever is necessary to protect this kingdom and its people, even if that means using you as a weapon." The honesty was brutal, but Elara appreciated it more than false kindness would have been. "And if I refuse to be used? Then we'll both likely die," he said bluntly. "Because the Shadow Court is returning, I'm certain of it now, and neither of us can face them alone. I need your power, and you need my knowledge and resources. We're bound together by necessity, whether we like it or not. I notice you left out the part about whether you plan to kill me if I become inconvenient." Alaric smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm leaving that option open. I found it's best to keep all possibilities available until the last moment." Despite the threat, despite the fear still humming beneath her skin, Elara felt a laugh bubble up. "At least you're honest. Honesty is a luxury I can afford with you. You're too valuable to waste on pretty lies." He released her shoulders and stepped back. "Now we need to present you to the court in a way that makes you my asset rather than my liability. That means a show of unity and strength. Can you follow my lead? Do I have a choice? Not really, but I find the illusion of choice makes people more cooperative." Before Elara could respond, Severine returned with a bundle of cloth in her arms. "The court is assembling, Your Majesty, and I took the liberty of bringing something more appropriate for the girl to wear." She shook out the bundle, revealing a dress of deep midnight blue, simple in cut, but clearly made of fine material. It wasn't armor or anything warrior-like, but it was leagues above Elara's torn servant's garb. "Change quickly," Alaric ordered, turning his back. "We don't have much time." Elara stripped off her ruined dress with shaking hands and pulled on the new one. It fit perfectly, which should have been impossible, but she was learning that magic made many impossible things routine. Severine helped her with the laces and even produced a brush to work through her tangled hair. "You're terrified," the ancient vampire observed quietly. "Good. Fear will keep you sharp, but don't let it control you. You're the descendant of Seraphina Lightbringer. Act like it." I don't know how she acted. Proudly, fiercely, with the certainty that she had every right to stand beside kings and challenge gods. Severine finished with her hair and turned her to face Alaric. "She's as ready as we can make her in 10 minutes." The Vampire King studied Elara with a critical eye, then nodded once. "It'll do. Remember, say nothing unless I prompt you to speak. Look confident, even if you're not. And whatever happens, whatever anyone says or does, don't show weakness. The court is like a school of sharks. They can smell blood in the water." "Comforting," Elara muttered. "I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to keep you alive long enough to be useful." He offered his arm with exaggerated courtesy. "Shall we?" Elara took his arm, feeling the coiled strength beneath the velvet sleeve, and let him lead her from the dungeon that had almost been her tomb. The castle above was a labyrinth of stone corridors and winding stairs, lit by torches that burned with an eerie blue-white flame. They passed servants who pressed themselves against the walls and bowed as Alaric swept past, their eyes wide with terror and curiosity when they glimpsed Elara at his side. "They already know," she whispered. "News travels fast in a castle full of vampires with supernatural hearing," Alaric replied. "By now, everyone from the highest lord to the lowest scullery maid knows that the royal sword woke and the kitchen girl survived the angel's tears. The story will have spread through the city by dawn." They climbed a final staircase and emerged into a broad hallway lined with portraits of severe-looking nobles from centuries past. At the end stood the massive doors to the throne room, currently closed. Two guards in black armor stood at attention, their faces carefully neutral. "Announce us," Alaric commanded. One guard opened the door while the other called out in a voice that echoed through the vast space. "His Majesty, King Alaric Valdris, Lord of Nocturna, Master of the Blood Court, and the girl Ilara Ashenbride." They stepped through, and Ilara's breath caught at the sight before her. The throne room was enormous, its ceiling soaring 3 stories high and painted with scenes of celestial battles. Massive windows of stained glass depicted the history of Nocturna, the wars, the treaties, the rise of the Valdris dynasty. And filling the floor space were dozens of vampires in elaborate court dress, their faces turned toward the entrance with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. At the center of the room, displayed on a pedestal of black marble, rested the royal sword. It still glowed with the soft silver light it had awakened to when Ilara touched it, pulsing gently like a sleeping heartbeat. Alaric led her down the center aisle between the assembled courtiers, his pace measured and regal. Ilara forced herself to walk with her head high, even though she could feel the weight of dozens of predatory gazes assessing her, judging her, calculating how to use or destroy her. They stopped before the throne, a massive construction of black stone inlaid with silver veins that resembled frozen lightning. Alaric released her arm and turned to face his court. "Members of the Blood Court," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the space. "You have heard the reports of what transpired earlier this evening. The royal sword, dormant for 3 centuries, has awakened. This girl, previously unknown to us, survived the trial of Angel's Tears and has been confirmed as a direct descendant of Seraphina Lightbringer." A murmur ran through the assembled vampires. Ilara saw fear on some faces, avarice on others, and pure calculation on most. A vampire stepped forward from the crowd, tall and rail-thin, with pale blonde hair and eyes like chips of ice. His clothing was ornate even by the court standards, dripping with jewels and gold thread. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice unctuous and false, "while we are all fascinated by this development, surely you must see the security concerns it raises. The girl committed treason by touching the royal sword. Prophecy or not, we cannot simply ignore our laws." "Lord Cassius makes a valid point," another voice chimed in, a female vampire with hair like copper and a gown of blood-red silk. "The law is clear. The penalty for touching the royal sword is death." "Lady Morgana speaks truly," Alaric agreed smoothly, and Ilara felt her stomach drop. "However, the law was written to prevent false claimants and thieves. It does not account for the genuine heir to Seraphina's bloodline revealing herself." "Genuine?" Cassius sneered. "We have only the sword's word for that, and ancient magic has been known to malfunction. Perhaps the girl is simply a mage with a clever trick." "Then perhaps you'd like to drink the angel's tears yourself, Lord Cassius, and prove your own bloodline," Alaric suggested mildly. The blonde vampire paled and stepped back. Another courtier pushed forward, a massive vampire with a scarred face and military bearing. Your Majesty, even if the girl is what the sword claims, what purpose does she serve? We are at peace. The Shadow Court is a myth used to frighten children. Why do we need a champion now? General Blackwood, Alaric addressed him formally, you fought in the last border skirmishes with the Northlands, did you not? 3 months ago? I did, Your Majesty. And did you not report unusual activity? Scouts going missing without a trace. Villages found completely empty, with no signs of struggle or flight? The general's expression grew troubled. I did, but we attributed that to— Or what? Alaric pressed. You're a soldier, Blackwood. When did raiders ever leave no trace? When did they ever drain a village of its people so cleanly that not even a child's toy remained? The throne room had gone very quiet. Ilara saw understanding dawning on some faces, denial hardening on others. You think the Shadow Court has returned? Severine said from where she stood at the edge of the room. Don't you, Your Majesty? I don't think, Alaric said flatly. I know. I've felt it in my blood for months now, a cold corruption spreading through the fabric of our world like rot through wood. I've seen the signs, the patterns. The Shadow Court is awakening, and they're gathering strength before they reveal themselves fully. This is hysteria, Cassius spat. You would have us believe in ghost stories to justify protecting some common girl who broke our laws. Careful, Cassius, Alaric said, and his voice dropped to something deadly. You're coming dangerously close to accusing me of lying. The blonde vampire swallowed and stepped back again, but his eyes glittered with malice. Of course not, Your Majesty. I merely suggest that perhaps your concern is coloring your interpretation of random events. Random? Alaric repeated. Tell me, does anyone else find it random that the royal sword woke precisely when reports of strange disappearances began increasing? That a prophesied champion appeared exactly when we might need one? I don't believe in that kind of randomness. He turned to Ilara then, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. This was the moment he'd been maneuvering toward. Ilara Ashenbride, step forward. She obeyed, her heart hammering. Alaric gestured to the royal sword on its pedestal. Touch it again. Let the court see what I saw. Ilara moved to the pedestal on unsteady legs. The sword was beautiful, a blade of silver steel, with a hilt wrapped in white leather, a pommel stone of pure crystal that blazed with inner light. She reached out slowly, half expecting it to burn her again. The moment her fingers touched the hilt, light exploded through the room. The sword blazed like a fallen star, so bright that even the vampires had to shield their eyes. Ilara felt power rush through her, the same energy she'd experienced after drinking the angel's tears, but magnified 100-fold. And then she heard it, a voice, ancient and feminine, speaking directly into her mind. The air returns. The blood remembers. The covenant is renewed. Around her, the court gasped. She realized with shock that they'd heard it too. The voice had echoed through the throne room for everyone to witness. Alaric smiled, a genuine expression of triumph. Still think it's a trick, Cassius? The blonde vampire looked like he'd swallowed poison. Several other courtiers had dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by the display of holy magic. Ilara released the sword and stepped back, swaying slightly. Alaric was at her side instantly, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. The covenant the sword speaks of, he addressed the court, is the ancient alliance between Seraphina Lightbringer and my ancestor, the first Alaric Valdris. An oath sworn in blood and magic that their lines would stand together against the darkness. For 300 years, that covenant has laid dormant because it wasn't needed. Now it wakes, which means the threat has returned. "And what do you propose, Your Majesty?" This came from a new voice, an elegant vampire woman with silver-threaded black hair and a face that suggested she'd been turned in her middle years. Her tone was respectful but pointed. "Even if we accept that the girl is who the sword claims and that danger approaches, she's untrained, unprepared. What good is a champion who doesn't know how to fight?" "An excellent question, Duchess Ravenna," Alaric acknowledged. "Which is why I'm claiming Elara Ashenbride under royal protection and appointing her to my personal household. She will be trained by our best warriors, educated in our history and magic, and prepared for whatever is coming. And until that preparation is complete, she will remain under my direct supervision and guard." The Duchess raised an eyebrow. "How protective of you." "I protect all my assets," Alaric said smoothly, "and Miss Ashenbride is potentially the most valuable asset in the kingdom. I'd be a fool to do otherwise." Cassius had recovered some of his composure. "And when this supposed threat fails to materialize, how long do you intend to indulge this fantasy? If I'm wrong, and the Shadow Court doesn't return, then we'll have wasted some time and resources training a young woman to fight. The kingdom will survive." Alaric's expression hardened. "But if I'm right and we do nothing, everyone in Nocturna, vampire and human alike, will die screaming. I know which risk I prefer to take." "I support His Majesty's decision," General Blackwood said suddenly, his gravelly voice cutting through the murmurs. "I've seen enough strange things in the field to respect prophecy when it announces itself this clearly. Better to prepare for a war that never comes than be caught defenseless when it does." "As do I," Severine added. "The old magic does not lie. If the sword has chosen, we should heed its choice." One by one, other courtiers began voicing their support, some genuine, others clearly political maneuvering. Cassius and his faction remained visibly opposed, but they were being outmaneuvered by Alaric's careful presentation. Finally, the Vampire King raised his hand for silence. "Those who oppose this course of action are free to petition me privately with their concerns, but the decision is made. Elara Ashenbride is under royal protection, and any harm that comes to her will be treated as treason against the crown. Is that understood?" The court murmured assent, though Elara could see the resentment simmering in many faces. She'd made powerful enemies tonight without even trying. "Good. Court is dismissed. Miss Ashenbride, come with me." Alaric swept from the throne room without waiting to see if she followed. Elara hurried after him, acutely aware of the eyes boring into her back. They navigated more corridors, climbing stairs until they reached a part of the castle that was clearly private, the royal wing, guarded and quiet. Alaric led her to a door that he opened with a touch, revealing a spacious chamber that was half bedroom, half study. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city of Nocturna, its lights twinkling in the darkness. A four-poster bed dominated one side of the room, while the other held shelves of books and a large desk covered in papers and maps. "This will be your room," he said. "It's warded against intrusion, both magical and physical. No one can enter without my permission except you." Elara stared at the luxury surrounding her. The bed alone was larger than the entire room she'd shared with 3 other servants. "Your Majesty." "Don't thank me," he cut her off. "This isn't kindness. You're valuable, and I'm protecting my investment. Tomorrow your training begins. Severine will oversee your magical education, General Blackwood will handle combat training, and I'll personally teach you the history and politics you'll need to navigate this world." "I can't pay for any of this," Elara said quietly. "You'll pay with service, and possibly with your life if it comes to that." Alaric moved to the window, his back to her. "I wasn't lying to the court, Elara. The Shadow Court is returning. I can feel them like a poison in my blood, growing stronger every day. When they finally reveal themselves, the war will be brutal and terrible. Many will die. You might be one of them. You really know how to make a girl feel welcome. He turned, and for the first time she saw something genuine in his expression, a weariness that went bone deep. I lost everything the last time we fought the Shadow Court. My wife, my children, my closest friends. I won't pretend this will be anything other than what it is, a desperate gambit to save what I can when darkness comes again. Then why do you sound like you don't think we'll win? Because I'm not certain we will. He crossed to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be difficult, and I need you sharp. There's a wardrobe with appropriate clothing, and the bathing chamber is through that door. If you need anything, pull the bell cord and a servant will come. Your Majesty, Ilara called as he was leaving. That thing you said about keeping the option open to kill me if I become inconvenient, were you serious? Alaric looked back at her, his red eyes unreadable. Ask me again in a month, when you know me better. Then decide if you think I was serious. He left, and the door sealed behind him with a soft click. Ilara stood alone in her new chamber, surrounded by luxury she'd never dreamed of, marked for a destiny she didn't understand, and bound to a vampire king who'd admitted he might kill her. She walked to the window and looked out over the city. Somewhere out there in the darkness, an ancient enemy was gathering strength, and somehow she, a servant girl who'd tripped over her own feet, was supposed to help stop them. Seraphina Lightbringer, she whispered to her reflection in the glass, I hope you left me more than just your blood, because I'm going to need all the help I can get. Her burned palm, now healed and marked with glowing symbols, pressed against the cool glass. The marks pulsed faintly in rhythm with her heart. The sword had chosen, the prophecy had spoken, and Ilara Ashenbride's old life was well and truly over. She just hoped her new one would last longer than a few weeks. The next morning came far too quickly. Ilara woke to find that someone had laid out training clothes, sturdy leather pants, a linen shirt, and boots that actually fit her feet. There was also breakfast on a tray, still warm. Fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and tea. More food than she'd normally eat in a day back when she was a servant. She dressed quickly and was halfway through the bread when a knock sounded at her door. Enter, she called, then felt foolish. What if it was someone dangerous? But it was Severine who glided into the room, looking no less ancient in the morning light filtering through the windows. Good, you're awake and eating. You'll need your strength. Come with me. Ilara grabbed one more piece of bread and hurried to follow. The ancient vampire led her through a bewildering series of corridors, down several flights of stairs, and finally into a vast chamber deep in the castle's lower levels. The room was clearly designed for training. Weapon racks lined the walls, holding everything from swords to daggers to stranger implements Ilara couldn't identify. Practice dummies stood in rows, and a clear area in the center was marked with mystical symbols. General Blackwood was already there, along with a younger vampire woman in practical fighting leathers. The general nodded approvingly when he saw Ilara. Punctual. Good. This is Captain Thorn, my best combat instructor. She'll be working with you daily. Captain Thorn studied Ilara with cool assessment. She was beautiful in the predatory way of all vampires, with short-cropped dark hair and scars that spoke of many battles. We'll see if the prophecy gave you any natural talent, or if we're starting from nothing. I've never held a sword in my life, Ilara admitted. Honesty, also good. Thorn moved to the weapon rack and selected a wooden practice blade. But before we begin with weapons, we need to see what your body can do. The angel's tears should have enhanced your physical capabilities. Let's test that. What followed was 2 hours of the most grueling physical activity Alara had ever experienced. Running, jumping, climbing, lifting. Thorn put her through a series of exercises designed to test strength, speed, agility, and endurance. To Alara's shock, she excelled at most of them. She could run faster than she'd ever imagined, could jump high enough to grab a ledge 10 feet up, could hold a plank position for 20 minutes without her muscles trembling. Her body responded to her will with a precision and power that felt like putting on a piece of clothing that fit perfectly for the first time. "Excellent," Thorn said when they finally paused for water. "You have the raw physical gifts. Now we build technique on that foundation." They moved to sword work, and here Alara struggled. Holding the practice blade felt awkward, and her attempts to mirror Thorn's demonstrations were clumsy at best. "Don't think," Thorn instructed. "You're too much in your head. Let your body learn the movement first. The mind follows." After an hour of humiliation, General Blackwood called a halt. "Enough. Combat training is a marathon, not a sprint. Captain, take her through basic forms for another hour, then send her to Severine. The girl needs to understand her magical heritage as much as her physical one." Thorn nodded and continued drilling Alara mercilessly. By the time she was finally released, every muscle in her body was screaming, though notably, she wasn't as exhausted as she should have been. The angelic blood was sustaining her, lending her endurance beyond normal human limits. Severine was waiting in a different chamber, this one clearly designed for magical work. Crystals grew from the walls like frozen flowers, and the air itself seemed to hum with power. "Sit," the ancient vampire commanded, pointing to a cushion in the center of a silver cymbals. "Your physical training is important, but magic is the true heritage of the angelic bloodline. Seraphina wasn't just a warrior, she was a conduit for divine power. You must learn to access that same gift." "How?" Alara asked, settling onto the cushion. "By reaching inside yourself to the place where your human nature meets your angelic heritage." Severine began lighting candles around the circle, each one producing silver flame. "Close your eyes, breathe deeply, feel the energy that's been humming under your skin since you drank the angel's tears." Alara obeyed, sinking into meditation. At first, there was nothing but her own breathing and heartbeat. Then, slowly, she became aware of something else, a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with body temperature. It felt like a tiny sun, radiating light and power. "You feel it?" Severine observed. "Good. That is your core, the source of your magic. Now imagine reaching toward it, not with your hand, but with your will. Call to it. Ask it to rise." Alara focused on that warmth, that light. She imagined reaching out to it, inviting it forward. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, light exploded from her hands. Alara's eyes snapped open to see silver fire dancing across her palms, not burning, but glowing with the same energy that had marked her skin when she touched the sword. "I'm doing it," she whispered in wonder. "You're barely touching the surface of what you can do," Severine corrected. Seraphina could call lightning from clear skies, could heal wounds with a touch, could banish darkness with a word. That power is in your blood, dormant but not dead. We must wake it fully before the Shadow Court reveals itself. They worked for hours, Severine guiding Alara through exercises designed to strengthen and control her magical abilities. By the end of the session, Alara could summon light at will, though it was weak and flickered out quickly. It was a start. "Enough for today," Severine finally said. "You're exhausted, even if you don't fully feel it yet. The angelic blood can push your body beyond normal limits, but that doesn't mean those limits don't exist. Push too far and you'll collapse." Alara was indeed feeling the strain now, a bone-deep weariness that made even standing an effort. Severine helped her to her feet and guided her back to her chamber. "Eat," the ancient vampire ordered, pointing to another tray of food that had appeared while they were gone. Rest. Tomorrow, we do this again, and the day after, and the day after that. This is your life now, Elara Ashenbride. Training and preparation until the moment comes when you must put it all to use. She left, and Elara collapsed onto the bed, too tired to even eat. But hunger eventually drove her up, and she mechanically consumed the food before stripping off her sweat-soaked training clothes and stumbling into the bathing chamber. The bath was already drawn, steaming and scented with herbs. Elara sank into it with a groan of relief, feeling her abused muscles begin to relax. This was her life now. Training to fight an enemy she'd never seen, learning magic she didn't understand, bound to a vampire king who might kill her if she failed to be useful. It was terrifying and overwhelming and utterly different from everything she'd known. But as she soaked in the hot water, Elara realized something. She wasn't bored. She wasn't invisible. She mattered. Maybe for terrible reasons, maybe as a weapon in someone else's war, but she mattered nonetheless. She thought of her mother, who died never knowing her daughter carried angelic blood, of her grandmother, who'd hidden that truth to protect her family, of Seraphina Lightbringer, who'd fought and died to save a world she'd never see peace in. "I'll do better," Elara promised the empty room. "I'll survive this. I'll be strong enough." Her marked palm glowed faintly in the dim light, as if answering her vow. Tomorrow, the training would continue, and the day after that, and the day after that, until she was ready. Or until the darkness came and consumed them all. But for tonight, she was still alive, still learning, still growing into whatever she was meant to become. And that would have to be enough. The days blurred together into a relentless rhythm of training, study, and exhaustion. Weeks passed, then a month. Elara's body transformed, becoming lean and strong, her movements gaining a grace that came from hours of practice with Captain Thorn. Her magic grew more controlled. She could summon light on command now, could even maintain it for several minutes without the flame guttering out. But it was her evening sessions with Alaric that proved most valuable and most unsettling. The Vampire King had taken it upon himself to educate her in the history of Nocturna, the politics of the court, and most importantly, the true nature of the Shadow Court. They met in his private study after her other training was complete, and he spoke of horrors with the casual tone of someone recounting old gossip. "The Shadow Court isn't simply evil for evil's sake," he explained one evening, pacing before the fireplace while Elara took notes. "They're vampires who discovered a way to feed on the essence of living beings, their souls, if you believe in such things, rather than merely their blood. It grants them power far beyond what normal vampires possess, but it also corrupts them utterly. They become addicted to that deeper sustenance, and they hunger always." "How did they discover this method?" Elara asked. "Through forbidden magic, experimentation with dark sorcery that the first vampire clans had agreed to abandon." Alaric's expression grew distant. "There was a vampire named Malachi who believed that our kind could become gods if we only had the courage to seize enough power. He gathered followers, those who were ambitious, cruel, or simply desperate enough to try anything. They performed rituals that twisted their very nature, and the Shadow Court was born." "And Seraphina stopped them?" "Seraphina and my ancestor, together, yes. The war lasted 20 years and devastated half the continent. By the end, both sides had lost so much." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "Seraphina fell in the final battle. She managed to banish Malachi and his lieutenants to a pocket dimension, A prison constructed from angelic magic and vampire blood combined. It was supposed to hold them forever. But it's failing. Prisons always fail eventually. Magic degrades over time, and 3 centuries is a long time, even for a working as powerful as that one. Alaric moved to the window, gazing out at the night. I've had scouts searching the old battlefield where the prison was created. They've found signs of weakening in the barrier, cracks in reality itself where the shadow court is beginning to seep through. Ilara felt cold despite the fire. How long until they break free completely? Months, perhaps less. He turned back to her, his red eyes glowing in the firelight. Which is why your training must accelerate. You're improving, but you're not ready yet, not nearly ready. Tell me what you need me to be ready for, Ilara said. Stop holding back. I need to understand what I'm facing. Alaric studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. Come with me. He led her from the study, down corridors she'd never traveled before, deeper into the castle than she'd been allowed. They descended spiral stairs that seemed to go on forever, until finally they reached a massive iron door covered in warding symbols. Alaric placed his hand on the door and spoke a word in a language Ilara didn't recognize. The wards flared brilliant blue, then faded as the door swung open. Beyond lay a chamber that could only be described as a war room. Maps covered the walls, not just of Nocturna, but of the entire continent. Colored pins marked locations with lines connecting them in patterns that suggested troop movements or supply routes. A massive table in the center held a 3-dimensional map of the kingdom with miniature figures representing various forces. But it was what stood against the far wall that made Ilara's breath catch. Suspended in cases of spelled glass were 3 creatures that looked like vampires, but weren't, not quite. Their skin was gray and corpse-like, their features twisted into permanent expressions of hunger. Even through the glass and the preserving magic, Ilara could feel the wrongness radiating from them. The sense that these things should not exist. Shadow vampires, Alaric said quietly. These are the lesser ones, soldiers, essentially, created by forcing humans to consume tainted blood. They have some of the strength and speed of true vampires, but none of the intelligence or control. They exist only to feed and destroy. You've captured these? My scouts have encountered packs of them in the borderlands over the past 2 months. These 3 are the only ones we managed to take alive, if you can call their existence life. He moved closer to the cases, his expression grim. Their presence confirms what I suspected. The Shadow Court isn't just weakening the prison from within, they're sending their servants through the cracks, building an army in preparation for full emergence. Ilara forced herself to look at the creatures more closely. They were hideous, yes, but more than that, they were tragic. If they'd been human once, forced into this state, can they be saved? She asked. Turned back? No. Alaric's voice was flat. Once the corruption takes hold, it's permanent. The kindest thing we can do is end their suffering quickly. He turned away from the cases. This is why your training matters, Ilara. When the Shadow Court breaks free, they won't come alone. They'll have an army of these things, plus shadow vampires who retain their intelligence, plus Malachi himself and his inner circle, vampires who've spent 3 centuries growing more powerful in their prison. How many? We don't know. Hundreds, certainly, possibly thousands. He gestured to the map table. Our entire military forces number perhaps 8,000 soldiers, counting both vampires and trained humans. We're outnumbered, and our enemies have powers we barely understand anymore. Ilara moved to the table, studying the miniature figures. Then how do we win? The same way we won last time, by targeting the source. Malachi is the key. He's the one who discovered the method of soul feeding, the one who leads them all. Kill him, and the Shadow Court will fracture. His lieutenants will fight amongst themselves for power rather than focusing on conquest. So we let them out of their prison and then assassinate their leader? Alara looked up at him. That sounds impossible. It probably is, Alaric agreed. But it's the best chance we have. The alternative is to try to hold the prison intact indefinitely, and that's not feasible. Better to choose our battlefield and timing than wait for them to choose it for us. And my role in this? You are the only one who can wield the royal sword. He said it simply, as if it explained everything, and perhaps it did. Seraphina used that blade to wound Malachi grievously 3 centuries ago. It's a weapon specifically designed to harm beings of pure darkness. In the final battle, you'll need to get close enough to him to strike a killing blow. While he's surrounded by his army? Yes. And you're certain I won't just die immediately? Oh, you probably will, Alaric said with brutal honesty. But if you manage even a moment's contact with that blade, if you can wound him severely enough, it might give us the opening we need to finish him. Alara stared at the Vampire King, feeling a surge of anger. So I'm what, a sacrificial pawn? You're training me just well enough to get close and land one hit before I die? I'm training you to survive as long as possible and do as much damage as you can before the inevitable happens. He met her glare without flinching. I told you from the beginning I wasn't a good man, Alara. I told you I would use you as a weapon. This is what that means. You bastard. Yes, he said it without shame. But I'm a bastard who's trying to save his kingdom. If sacrificing you achieves that, I'll do it without hesitation, just as I'd sacrifice myself or anyone else in this castle or anyone in the entire kingdom if it meant stopping the Shadow Court. The cold calculation in his voice should have terrified her. Instead, Alara felt a strange respect building. At least he was honest about it. And if I refuse? If I decide I don't want to die for your kingdom? Then I'll kill you myself, quickly and painlessly, and hope that perhaps the sword will choose another heir in time. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. But I don't think you'll refuse, because you're not the kind of person who runs when duty calls. You proved that the moment you drank the angel's tears. You could have chosen peaceful execution. Instead, you chose the harder path. He was right, damn him. Alara wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all, but she'd made her choice that night in the dungeon. She'd chosen to matter, even if it cost her everything. I hate you, she said quietly. I know. I'd hate me too. Alaric moved back to the map table. Now let's discuss strategy. If you're going to die fighting Malachi, you might as well understand what you're dying for. They spent hours going over battle plans, discussing tactics and scenarios. Alaric explained how the various forces would be deployed, where the fighting would likely be fiercest, how they'd attempt to create an opening for Alara to reach Malachi. The key is distraction, he said, moving miniature figures across the table. We'll need to engage his army fully, make him think we're committing everything to a conventional battle. Meanwhile, a small strike team, probably General Blackwood, Captain Thorne, Severine, and myself, will work to create a path through the chaos. Your job is to stay alive and stay with us until we reach Malachi. And then? Then you do what Seraphina did. You strike with everything you have and pray it's enough. Alara studied the map, her mind working through possibilities. What if we don't wait for them to break free? What if we go to the prison site now, while it's still weakening? Could we strike before they're at full strength? Alaric froze. That would be suicidally reckless. Unlike my current assignment? He actually smiled, a genuine expression of dark amusement. Fair point. But the prison site is deep in the Shadowlands, hostile territory controlled by creatures aligned with the Shadow Court. Getting there would require crossing hundreds of miles of dangerous ground. We'd be exposed, vulnerable. But if we succeeded, we'd catch them unprepared, maybe even prevent the full-scale war entirely. Or we'd throw away our best chance of victory on a desperate gamble and die accomplishing nothing. But Alaric was studying the map with new interest, his tactical mind clearly working through the possibilities. It would require perfect timing. We'd need to arrive when the prison is weak enough that we can access it, but before Malachi is strong enough to break free on his own. Is that possible? Maybe. My scouts have been monitoring the degradation rate. According to their latest reports, we have perhaps 3 weeks before the barriers fail completely. But there's a window, maybe 4 or 5 days, when the prison will be accessible but not yet breached. Elara felt excitement building despite the fear. Then we have an opportunity, a real chance to end this before it starts. We'd need a small force, Alaric mused, now fully engaged with the idea. Too many people would draw attention and make us slow, but too few and we'd be overwhelmed if we encounter resistance. Perhaps a dozen? The strike team plus a handful of skilled fighters. You're actually considering this? I'm considering whether dying in the Shadowlands has better odds than dying on our own battlefield. He looked up at her. It would still probably kill you, you realize. In fact, it almost certainly would. At least in a formal battle here in Nocturna, you'd have an army supporting you. In the Shadowlands, it would be just our small group against whatever forces are already gathered there. But we'd have the element of surprise, and we might be able to prevent thousands of deaths. Alaric was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the map table. Finally, he nodded. I'll have the scouts provide more detailed intelligence on the prison site and the surrounding territory. If, and this is a substantial if, it looks remotely feasible, well, attempt it. But Elara, understand what you're agreeing to. This would be a one-way mission. Even if we succeed in killing Malachi, getting out alive would be nearly impossible. I was already agreeing to probably die, she pointed out. At least this way feels more active, like I'm making a choice rather than just waiting for fate to happen to me. You're either very brave or very foolish. Can't I be both? That startled another smile from him. Yes, actually, Seraphina was both as well. It seems to be a trait of your bloodline. They continued planning late into the night until Elara was swaying with exhaustion. Finally, Elara called a halt. Enough. You need rest. Tomorrow, we'll present this idea to the others and see what they think. As they climbed back up the endless spiral stairs, Elara found herself walking beside him rather than behind, as a servant would. They'd somehow shifted from master and tool to something more like partners in shared madness. Your Majesty, she said as they neared the residential levels. Earlier, you said I should ask you again in a month whether you were serious about killing me if I became inconvenient. It's been a month. Alaric stopped walking. In the torchlight, his face was unreadable. Do you really want to know the answer? Yes. He considered for a moment, then said, I was serious. I am still serious. If circumstances change and you become a greater liability than asset, I will end your life without hesitation. Before she could respond to that brutal honesty, he continued, but I will also fight to my last breath to prevent that circumstance. You've proven yourself valuable, not just as a weapon, but as a strategic thinker. I need that. So I'm motivated to keep you alive and useful. How comforting.